Welcome to this week's Long Island Legal. My name is Joe Campolo. I'm the managing partner of Campolo, Middleton, McCormick, a full-service law firm located at the MacArthur Airport. I'm here this morning with Dave Calone. Dave is a friend and one of Long Island's best-kept secrets. He is a tremendous resource here on Long Island for innovation, entrepreneurship, startup businesses. He's a principal in Jove Equity Partners. Is that correct?
Yep.
And he's also Suffolk County Planning Commission. You're still the chair of that as well?
Yep.
Great. And you're heading up a congressional caucus at this point. So we got a lot to talk about this morning. Dave. So let's start with your venture capital hat. Tell me a little bit how you got involved in that.
Sure. I started out actually from the legal perspective. I'm still a lawyer. Actually, was a federal prosecutor and then a state prosecutor, and then went to the law firm in one of the law firms in the city, and I got more involved in business law and looking at companies and how they're growing, and sort of their needs, and wound up going over and joining a venture firm that was growing and needed someone who had a legal background, but also was interested in helping grow the business side of it. And so I actually served as general counsel for a year or two before actually taking over the firm about 6 years ago.
Great. And so what sort of companies does Jove look at? Like, what do you do on a day-to-day basis? What are you looking for?
Sure. We have a number of investments in generally early stage companies, though we do look a little bit at later stage companies, those that are actually cash flowing. So we find early stage as those that are in the technology field that we think have significant growth prospects. Either we've started some, including one that I started, I'm the chairman of, that's now 40 some odd employees with several millions of dollars in revenue, and those are fun from a strategic perspective, right, to watch them grow and to help them kind of lead them grow, bring in a management team to run them. And we also invest in other earlier stage companies that we don't start, but we're excited about their possibilities. And we do that mostly around the country, though we've just started looking very specifically through a new entity we've created called the Long Island Emerging Technologies Fund at companies coming out of the research laboratories here on Long Island.
Great. So for our viewers, many of which are technology companies, which is a lot of our client base, right? Mm-hmm. People that are interested in getting some sort of venture capital funding or any sort of investments whatsoever, what's the best thing companies can do to prepare for that from your perspective?
Sure. I mean, the most important thing we look at is the team. And the team is important because often that initial idea that companies have doesn't wind up being the idea that they actually succeed with. And we found that with the company I mentioned before that we started 5 or 6 years ago that now has millions of dollars of revenue. It was actually the second or third idea we had that actually caught the market's attention and got us real traction. So I think what a lot of people who are starting companies don't realize, because they maybe haven't been through it before, is that it's not always your first idea. So you need to be able to be knowledgeable about the field and be able to pivot when maybe that first idea isn't quite working, or maybe there's aspects of the idea that you should hone in on. So we look for teams that have the ability to have some sense of where they want to go with the company, but also are flexible and knowledgeable enough about the industry that they could pivot if they need to.
Right, to see where the opportunity is. A lot of times you think the opportunity is this way, but it's actually a little bit that way.
Exactly.
And this sense of entrepreneurship, so I taught for years in Stony Brook's business school, and one of the things that they began to introduce to business owners is this sense of entrepreneurship, right? So everybody has resources. People have money, people have capital, people have labor. But it's really this entrepreneurship that makes great companies work and not work, right? And so talk about entrepreneurship. I mean, it's a new word that's out there now. Everything's about entrepreneurship, right? But what's been your experience with entrepreneurship?
The bottom line is you need to be able to innovate, whether you're in a small company, a startup, whether you're in a larger company, whether you're at a law firm, et cetera. I mean, we're all, at the end of the day, in this atmosphere where things are changing rapidly in the marketplace, in any marketplace. And so the ability to be able to innovate, to change tack if you need to put resources against part of the bigger opportunities as those emerge are critical aspects. And sort of learning that is something that often happens on the job, and in the field. So we actually often look at entrepreneurs people leading companies who maybe had secondary roles at our startups before. So they've been through some of the weeds and they've been through some of the difficulties. Right. Really, with Stony Brook and other schools starting to teach entrepreneurship, you're having a new class of leaders who maybe have a sense of that from case studies. But for the most part, throughout the country, people learn by doing.
Right. So here on Long Island, we have a unique ecosystem, right? And so folks like Accelerate Long Island, all those other folks have been trying to get this all packaged up together because we're a powerhouse. I mean, if people really look at what exists on Long Island, it's a powerhouse. It's hard packaging all up together. Where do you see the Long Island business climate going over the next 5 years or so?
Sure. I mean, I think we have some real challenges, particularly some structural challenges from the governmental side, where I think there have been, a buildup of hurdles that companies here have to deal with, whether it's taxes, whether it's regulations, whether it's simple infrastructure things. I mean, at the end of the day, and this reflects somewhat my role as the chair of the Planning Commission for Suffolk County. Government's role should be to help increase capacity for the economy, whether it's providing roads or buses or trains or education and those kinds of things, and simply providing the rules of the road for businesses. And too often, whether it's permitting, whether it's the lack of transportation, and I'll give you an example of that, we have a decent, transit system in the Long Island Railroad, I think everyone would say, but only if you're going to New York City. Right. Those who want to come out to New York, from New York City to Long Island to work, it's very difficult because we don't have the third track going through Nassau County, and until recently, or really until the next year or so, we won't have the second track in Suffolk County. So what that means is that businesses on Long Island have a hard time getting employees from the city, and yet we have this amazing group of people, 8 million of them, at our doorstep, and we have a hard time attracting people because of the lack of transit to come out here to work.
That's a great point, and that is a planning issue. It was sort of short-sighted when the initial planning stages went in, figuring we were all going to be coming from here to go into the city. Right. And now there's a lot of opportunity, particularly here in Suffolk County. Yep. So your role as chairman of the Suffolk County Planning Commission, right? A lot of folks, I think, don't know what that is or what its function is. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. The Planning Commission has a couple of roles. We review all the major projects going on in Suffolk County from a regional perspective. So we are what's called a home rule state, which means that towns and villages have final say on land use. But under state law, each county has a planning commission which looks at the major projects from a regional perspective. And the county planning commission gets to weigh in on the major developments, and the towns and villages have to abide by what we say unless they overrule us with a supermajority. So, in other words, if a town board could pass something normally by 3 votes out of 5 people, right, if we weigh in on something, they have to follow what we say unless they decide to go against that by, say, in this case, a 4-vote majority of a board. So, at the end of the day, we do have a significant amount of leverage in the approval process for major projects, and we weigh in on what matters regionally. And those things that matter regionally are things like transportation, things like making sure we have enough workforce housing. We certainly on Long Island have a lot of need for different kinds of housing than we've had in the past. Right. We started as a single family because that was what the demand was, and the supply has lagged behind the demand, though that's starting to change in terms of the need for more rentals, more multifamily housing, housing for people who are starting out. The biggest complaint that we hear from business owners here in our region is our employees can't afford to live here. Right. So we need a different kind of housing that more meets that need. And there's good progress happening on that, but it's been a little slower than I think anyone would have liked, but it's definitely been picking up the last few years, especially coming out of the recession.
Right, and one of the things that I know folks have been working on, and we had Bill Schoolman on the show, and I know you know Bill and Seven Bus.
Bill was one of our commission members for a couple of years, and it was great.
Right, and what he's been doing, which I think is pretty innovative, is he's been working with the larger employers, especially the hospitals and the universities here on Long Island, to help get them cheap transportation for their employees that are in Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, and need to come out here and get that transportation out here. So it's actually, an opportunity for someone who's an entrepreneur to be able to work on that.
You talk about Bill. I mean, Bill's exactly that kind of entrepreneur we need on Long Island, creating new solutions to this structural infrastructure problem. Trains, while they're good at solving bulk problems, bulk moving masses of people, the end of the day is we don't have any north-south connections. in Suffolk County
Right.
or Nassau County
Right.
that are mass transit, other than the buses, which there were significant. There have been issues with the bus systems generally in terms of lack of, they're expensive to run in a suburban context, et cetera. But if you have a private sector innovator who can bring in some new ideas and some private sector experience in the bus industry like Bill has, you really have a chance to not only have a good business, but also make a real improvement to the Long Island economy.
Right, and I think that's what we really need, right, are these entrepreneurs that are going to be out there to find the solutions to these specific problems that we have. We have this massive infrastructure. It's great. It drives the bulk of the economy, but not everybody can work their business and their schedules around what that mass infrastructure is able to create.
And it's expensive. Right. And trains are really expensive, and there's going to be some big infrastructure dollars spent on in the city with Second Avenue subway, and hopefully on Long Island with the third track, which will be in Nassau County, and allow trains to go the opposite direction than all the trains going in. But those are big expenses. Other places are looking at things like light rail, which are or bus rapid transit, and other cities that are now developing their transit. We developed our transit, decades and decades ago, are looking more at the more flexible kind of transit. And in fact, County Executive Balone has a proposal for what he calls Connect Long Island, which is to use buses, to accomplish north-south transit and those kinds of things. It's far less expensive, and it also is more flexible.
Yep. So that's great. So one of the other things that I think you do that's important for folks to know that you're doing is you're helping to educate Congress on issues that not only Long Island entrepreneurs are facing, but entrepreneurs nationwide are facing. So why don't you talk a little bit about the work you're doing there?
Sure. I got together about 2 or 3 years ago with some members of Congress to create the Congressional Caucus on Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And caucuses in Congress are like clubs.
Right.
They're basically, there's a caucus for Tibet, there's a caucus for people who care about Mexico, there's a caucus for people who care about bicycles. There wasn't, we noticed, a caucus that focused on innovation and entrepreneurship. And yet we know that that's a key driver of where our economy needs to go. So we wanted to do this in a bipartisan way, because there's no reason that entrepreneurship and innovation should be anything other than bipartisan. Both parties speak eloquently.
Blue and it's not red.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
It's where we need to go, and everyone agrees. Now you can define details. You can disagree a little bit, but for the most part, everyone's on board with where we do need to have more innovation and more entrepreneurship. So we worked with Congressman Polis from Colorado on creating this, and he was able to recruit 2 Republican co-chairs, and then a fellow, he was a Democrat, so he recruited 1 other Democrat. So our co-chairs are from Colorado, Michigan, Florida, and California. Okay. And then they got, 25 some odd members of Congress to join them as part of this. And we've had a few briefings from members of Congress and staff about different issues. How do you create a startup ecosystem? How do you focus on what do companies need to succeed, and what's the real story, of how they actually need to go through a process? Because members of Congress, for the most part, are not business people, or if they were, they certainly weren't early-stage business people. And so it's an education about how you do this, how people go through this process. And we started last year what we call Startup Day across America. Right. And the idea was that to have members of Congress go to startups, early-stage companies, in their districts. And the message was, it's not just Silicon Valley, it's not just Boston, it's not just Austin, et cetera, that have startups. Startups are actually all over the country. Right. And yet they're often overlooked. And so we had a couple dozen members of Congress and senators go to startups in their area last year. And we just repeated that our second time doing that this last week. And in fact, we have Congressman Bishop and Congressman Israel actually are participating next week in a joint event at Huntington, the new startup launchpad in Huntington. Yep. In fact, we also invited Congressman King and Congresswoman McCarthy, who haven't confirmed yet. But bottom line is, go see what's happening in your own neighborhood. Talk to the innovators in your own backyard, and understand what they need and how you can be helpful to them on a federal policy level. And the other thing I do on a more national level is I help run. I'm on the board of Patriot Boot Camp, which helps. It's a not-for-profit that helps provide returning veterans with skills training so they can start companies and entrepreneurship, and how they even, a lot of our military folks are very highly skilled. We know they're determined and hardworking, and often that is a great fit for an entrepreneurial path once they return from the service. But often the VA doesn't have a good way to train them.
Right.
And so we've started this not-for-profit to help provide training for vets.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So if people want to get more or learn more about that, where can they look for more information on that?
Sure. There's a TechStars. It's called TechStars Patriot Boot Camp, and the TechStars is a entity that runs accelerator programs around the country, and this is an aspect of that.
I thought I saw something maybe like on 60 Minutes or something about this type of boot camp. I always thought it was very interesting. Here you have, like you said, all this talent.
Yeah.
They spend all this money training them, disciplining them. You know what I
Right.
mean? Getting them, and then they just leave them flat here in the country.
Right.
So it's a lot of talent.
The
there.
transition process is obviously difficult on a number of levels, and there's a lot lacking in the federal response there in general. But we sort of felt that, like you said, you have people with skills who are well trained, they're determined and focused. Those are all things that entrepreneurs critically need, and you have it in a group of people who are self-selected and also then trained by our taxpayer dollars to be that way. So they're good for many of them. It's a good opportunity.
Right. All right. Last thing I want to talk about. So we're up and coming on a midterm election now with a lame duck president. Right. President Obama's termed out.
Yep.
And you've been working sort of with Congress closely. What do you think are the issues that are going to be really important to voters come November?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's about the economy, and I think that the jobs certainly have been improving. I have 7 or 8 portfolio companies, and certainly we're seeing the economy improve. It's a slow improvement,
right?
And I don't think anyone would be thrilled with the progress, but it's certainly progress, and certainly coming out of the depths we had from a few years ago, it's certainly positive. I think what's troubling, honestly, about the Congress is the inability to get anything done, and I think that there are a few key issues where compromise is pretty easily in reach, and yet there's a lot of politics being played on both sides for the most part, particularly things like immigration and obviously issues like trade and others where there's a lot of common ground, and even the corporate tax is a great example. I mean, everyone agrees that the corporate taxes structure is broken.
Right.
Rates are too high. There's too many loopholes. There's a trade-off there, and you can argue back and forth a little bit on the percentages, but everyone agrees on the basic problem, and yet, nothing's getting done, and that hurts our economy. And I think it hurts job creation, and it hurts our companies as well, because at the end of the day, we're not competing just against our local companies anymore. We're competing every minute of every day against companies from all over the world.
Globally, absolutely. Yeah. So thanks, Dave. Joining us again, folks, this week was Dave Calone. Dave is truly one of Long Island's leaders. He's a quiet, unassuming guy, but he really gets a lot accomplished. He's a principal, again, in Jove Equity Partners, a venture capital firm that helps specifically Long Island companies as well as companies nationally. He's chair of the Suffolk County Planning Commission. He's helped put together a congressional caucus to study innovation and entrepreneurship so they can learn what those startup companies need. And it's really been an absolute pleasure to have you, David. Always good to catch up and chat with you. Any final words that you want to add to Long Island businesses out there, so what they can be doing over the next couple of weeks to get through the summer and get prepared for the fall, right?
I always say that the summer is a great time to catch up on sort of those contacts and those emails, those things you meant to do and wanted to do, because thankfully everyone takes a little bit of a breather. But in today's world, it's a go-go sort of atmosphere. So take advantage of the time.
Yep, enjoy the last few weeks of the summer is really all we can do, right? Well, thanks a lot, Dave.
All right, thanks for having me.
Yep.